It's really fascinating that you brought that up because we've all heard these concepts like fake it till you make it or act as if. And I think a lot of times we get hung up and hold ourselves back feeling like we need to have the belief or the thought before we can elicit the behavior, where it's almost like the other way around. If you adopt the behavior that you would execute had you had that belief or that thought, you tend to adopt the thought and belief faster and easier than waiting to do things the other way around. That's really, really cool. Do you have any strategies, ways to kind of put something on the line or create stakes that and incentives to accelerate learning?
Definitely. I mean, there are different incentives at different stages of one's life. I end up lecturing to a lot of medical students or kids that want to go to medical school, and they're very competitive by nature and they're very driven. Also, college undergraduates, they want to perform well. But there are also, many people who just want to learn new things and do new things, new physical skills, new cognitive skills. So the incentives can come from a number of places. I find personally that internally generated incentives can be very powerful. The real desire to have something, or to gain some skill or some knowledge or some level of health. At the same time, we know that thinking about this from the darker side, the fear side, is one of the major incentives is fear of public failure, right? I mean, people are writing wonderful literature, like Brené Brown's got this whole thing about shame and vulnerability. That her success is, reflects the fact that people will do most anything to avoid public shame and vulnerability, right? And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not, under some circumstances that's good. Under some circumstances that's bad. So, what level of shame and fear that one requires in order to learn something new varies from person to person. For me personally, I like to declare my goals publicly. I will get out there and tell my closest friends, but also tell people that, that are going to hold me accountable. And oftentimes those are not my closest friends about what I'm going to do or what I plan to do. At the same time, I think there's an additional benefit to doing that, which is that, and people do this on various websites in terms of diet and weight loss. Very rarely do people do this in terms of reading books or for learning languages. Those are activities that there's sort of less shame. Putting up a picture of yourself if you're very overweight, and then the incentive to then show a miraculous transformation into a healthy, more fit person is one that many people can relate to. If I don't learn French, I don't know that anyone's going to be disappointed in me, except maybe the French when I go to France, right? I'll be able to, and certainly I'd be disappointed in me, but that disappointment can be hidden. So there needs to be some way of publicly disclosing that. And there are apps to do this sort of thing, but so being quite selective about who you tell that you're going to do something and have them hold you accountable. Financial incentives are big, right? If any of you have ever gotten a speeding or a parking ticket, and you get that bill in the mail, it always hurts. Nobody likes those. Money hurts. And so financial incentives, which are going to scale depending on how much money you have to lose, are always a good one, right? And so putting a wager down on the line. But you have to take that seriously.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, declaring goals publicly is very powerful, and it has this collateral benefit, which is that it puts you on a bit of a listening tour, and you get feedback about what your goals are. So if I say to you, look, I'm going to Paris in a couple months. I really want to learn French, and I'm not finding the time. I'm not, I'm making all these excuses. I say, but so I'm going to give you 10 grand, and you're going to give it back to me only if I have conversational French in place when I go. That's a pretty strong incentive. It's a very strong incentive, in fact. And the other one is that you might say, great, I know this terrific program for learning French on a rapid time scale. So I also go on a listening tour and I get information back. So there, I think it's important who you tell, and I think it's important that you tell. And when you do those two things, you face the possibility of shame, like how'd that work out? And if I say, hey, if we run into each other later and you say, did you learn French? And I'd say, not really. And you go, bummer. Well, did you have a good time anyway? I'd say, yeah, it was a pretty good time, because I can't compare it to what would have happened had I known conversational French, which would certainly enhance my experience there. But if you say to me, you know what, that's a bummer, and I'm spending your 10 grand on a beautiful trip to Paris myself, that sucks. And that's the kind of thing that I just don't want to have to live with. And so I think that publicly disclosed incentives are very powerful, but you have to be selective about who you talk to.
Right.
Yeah.
And having that emotional pain involved as a part of the stakes. One of my clients, he we'd set a goal for him on how much weight he wanted to lose in a month. And I could tell about 2 weeks in, he wasn't taking it serious. And I knew that from a political perspective, he was not a fan of Donald Trump. So I said, look, is this something that you really want to achieve? And he said, absolutely. And I said, all right, well then let's put some stakes on the line. And he's like, well, what do you have in mind? I'm like, you write $1,000 check. And if you achieve your goal, I'll rip up the check or I'll give the money back to you. And he goes, okay, yeah, let's do that. And I go, but here's the catch. If you don't hit your goal, that $1,000, I'm not keeping it. I'm donating it to the Trump campaign. And he was like, oh my God. He got like sick to his stomach.
Right, because political affiliations are very strong incentive for people, right? You know, it's sort of an affiliation in general. You know, one of the things that's remarkable, we all love these stories because they kind of, at least, you know, they inform us about something innately important about how the brain and nervous system works. So, for instance, the story, I don't know when this happened that sort of launched this story, but it's kind of an interesting one. The mother who lifted the car off her child, right? Mm-hmm. The mother who achieved superhuman strength in the moment because of the desire to save her children, or the grizzly bear who protects her bear cubs. You know, we're aware of that very strong incentive. That tells you something about just how strong that maternal drive is, about our feelings about tribe and affiliation, protecting one's own. You know, unfortunately, I don't think anyone's ever done the control experiment. You know, could a mother lift the car off somebody else's kid? That's a good, but human suffering, the deep desire to relieve human suffering in the moment when somebody's injured, this incredible story, it speaks to the ability of the brain, right? It's the brain that drives the muscles. You have motor neurons in your head that drive motor neurons in your muscles that drive the muscle movements. It was the incredible incentive, the emotionality. Oh my God, this car could kill my child. I've got to lift it off the kid. That leads to this, anecdotal superhuman feat. And so there's a positive, removing a negative, right? Especially when there's a close affiliation, protecting one's own. The kids grow up, you say anything about my mother, I'm going to do this. Say anything about my sister, I've got a sister, so don't say anything about my sister, right? You'll see a different side of me. The Stanford, the nice neuroscience professor isn't the guy that comes out. Someone says something bad about my sister, right? It's a different persona and engages a different set of circuits, very primitive circuits. They're designed to protect based on affiliation. That's a positive thing when you're protecting somebody's life for good reasons. Those circuits also, when they go awry, are also what underlie all the mischief and misfortune in the world, like war and gangs and things like that, So I think incentives are something really interesting to think about. And for everybody, those incentives are going to differ a little bit, right? But it's clear that you need them. And you need them as learning gets harder, and learning gets harder as an adult. But what I'll tell you, and what I gave you evidence for before, and there's more evidence out there if anyone wants it, they could contact me or contact you guys and we can steer them in the right direction, is that the brain can change according to how you want it to change. That's absolutely true. But you need the incentive, and the good news is the incentive is there. You just have to tap into it.
Do you set goals?
I do. Yeah. So yeah.
And if so, why? I'm curious about your process and your reason behind setting goals.
Okay. So the simple answer is that I've told you a lot about how the brain is this magnificent learning, mapping, behavior, perception generating organ, and yet at the same time, the brain has some flaws. And those flaws are reflected in common day behaviors and words you'll recognize, like procrastination, excuse making, or what the great Stephen Pressfield referred to as resistance. I don't know if you've ever read The War of Art.
Love it.
But he talks about resistance as a writer, as an artist, or as anything really, that this thing of resistance. And the brain wants to help you learn, but your brain will also generate thoughts, and they are thoughts, that will get in your own way. And so one way to think about this is that, let's say you had a good workout yesterday, went for a good run. Maybe you guys did some wrestling, and you're feeling a little sore, you might be feeling, right? And I
am indeed.
Yeah, right. And so you might have a little twitch in your shoulder muscle today, that's common, and from experience, that doesn't mean your shoulder's injured. It's just you put it through some stress yesterday and it's recovering. Maybe the connective tissue is recovering. You don't think much of it. Now, you have a twitch in your shoulder, you don't think, oh goodness, I need to go to the hospital, or you know what, I shouldn't work out for a week, or you know what, I better go do 300 pull-ups. What you think of is, my shoulder's twitching. Now let's think about the brain as an organ, just like your musculature is a system and your heart is an organ and your lung is an organ. Every once in a while, your heart skips a beat. Sometimes you see somebody that you really are attracted to or that you love, and your heart might skip a beat. That's the phrase, right? You don't think that you're having a heart attack necessarily, but if you have a thought, like you wake up in the morning and you think, you know what? I don't want to do this today. I don't want to do this meeting. I really don't want to do this language learning course. I don't want to, I don't want to go for a run. I don't want to do my workout. Those are just brain twitches, okay? So one of the important things to realize, and one of the most powerful things that you can realize right now, if you just take this as a fact, because it is a fact, which is that your thoughts are just the activity of cells in your brain, and it might not be a good idea to trust all those thoughts, right? And so goals are a way, well, like especially if you write them down or you incentivize them by telling somebody else, is that you've placed those thoughts into a category of importance and truth to you. That getting up each day and doing your workout, or getting up each day and learning a little bit of conversational French, is something that, yes, you really do want to do. So that when the other Anthony surfaces, and you do have multiple Anthonys in there, they're all Anthony, but maybe you don't have any of these blocks, but I know that when the other Andrews surface and they say, not today, too tired, or I'll learn it tomorrow. Or is it really that important that I achieve conversational French? Well, oh wait, there's that $10,000. I guess it is important. It's just another way of constraining my goal-oriented behavior. But the goals are one way of saying, these are the thoughts that I believe are true. These are the ones that I'm accountable for. And these are the ones that I am going to trust in my behavior. So one really kind of more general example of this is the notion of wedding and marriage. Right? There are people out there who have argued that wedding and marriage is sort of an antiquated thing that had to do with societies and the way they were built and financial needs. And there might be some truth to those arguments. However, I will say this, that there's also a truth to a public declaration. What is a wedding and a marriage? Well, a wedding is a great party, and it's a celebration of love and all these wonderful things that we all enjoy. But it's also a public declaration of what you will do and what you won't do. Yeah. And written into that ceremony is something very interesting about the brain, which is if all that was going to happen anyway, if people were going to stay faithful in sickness and in health until death do us part, well, then why would they say it? They're saying it publicly in front of many people. You're incentivizing it so that if you fail, you look bad. That's the kind of tacit message there that no one's really talking about. And you're getting rewarded. You're getting a lot of gifts often, celebrating in a beautiful place. For the positive part of you, yes, you're making a good goal. This is someone standing up, or two people standing up and saying, we're going to work towards something positive. And there's all sorts of incentives written into that ceremony that you're not going to do all the behaviors, even if it's not written into the ceremony. Even if I think about it, I won't. But that's the hidden message in there, that your brain sometimes is going to encourage you or try and encourage you to do things and say things that you might not want to do. And in fact, you're saying right now, you don't want to do them. And so that's a really kind of, it's not a daily example, but it's an example that I think most people can relate to of goal setting and what goal setting represents. Goal setting represents the admission, the acknowledgement that your brain is sometimes wrong, that your thoughts are sometimes wrong. Just like you sometimes drop a glass in the kitchen, that was the wrong behavior. It's easy enough to clean up most of the time. Sometimes your thoughts are wrong, you don't want to trust them. So a goal for me is a truth. It's something that I've decided, I've thought enough times that I want to accomplish, that I'm going to put it down on a piece of paper so that when my thoughts, the other Andrew says, hey, are you sure? Is it really necessary? Come on. It's that hesitation or resistance that Pressfield refers to in his writing, and others have referred to in other phraseology, that the goal is my way of saying, nope, that's the truth. And the good thing is when you're young, people set goals for you. Go to school, don't be tardy, show up to class. As you get older, it's your responsibility. And I see being an adult, it includes many things, but one of the most fundamental things about being an adult is to take as a truth that the brain's job is to learn new things, and take as a truth that it's my job as an adult to continue to learn new things and to try and improve my life, my interactions with others, other people's lives, and ultimately the world. That's what we should all be doing, in my opinion. So goals are truths, and they're truths that you acknowledge are going to stick and you're going to work towards, because your brain has a tendency to lie a lot. And we know that. It's called procrastination or laziness.
I'm curious if you have a specific methodology for writing and declaring your goals. Jack Canfield, in his book, The Success Principles, he talked about always phrasing things in the positive. You know, if you want to be skinnier, you don't say, I'm going to lose 15 pounds. You take whatever you weigh, you subtract 15 pounds, and you say, I weigh. So another important aspect of that is you're phrasing your goal as if the desired end result has already been achieved. He talks about building in your game plan, your action strategy, because that's where a lot of people get lost. And where we're going to take people with this is, you know, when they're done listening to our conversation, they'll have a step-by-step game plan, ways that, you know, we both implement this stuff to upgrade our brain. But, you know, we have this goal, and then we're like, if you don't have the daily implementation of that goal and those strategies in place, then that goal can sometimes fall by the wayside. So you have your goal, and then you say, because, and you talk about the things you're going to do to make that goal happen. Do you have a specific system that you use, or do you write it down? Do you think it? And if so, what is that system?
Yeah, great question. I'm really intrigued by this Canfield example, and I know you've probably experienced this with a number of your clients, what works and doesn't work. You know, I think it varies from person to person, and I think that before I answer, I'll just throw in something on the side, which is I think this tendency for your brain to lie and kind of get its own way means you need multiple tools available. You need fear available when you're sometimes you need positive incentives. So I think at some level it all works, but that doesn't mean that none of it is, that there aren't certain things that are more powerful than others. So for me, it's very important to realize that our ability to learn, it is constrained in that you can't learn everything all at once. I can't meet 1,000 goals. So I have to be somewhat constrained or limited in the number of goals I pursue. Conversational French might be a good one. Conversational French, German, and Chinese might be a lot to bite off in a short period of time. Although, I probably should challenge myself on that one. And there are probably ways that, and people that have accomplished that. So for me, it's really getting clear about what I want. And that's an interesting one. I have met more people, as a neuroscientist, I engage with a number of different kinds of people who are interested in how the brain works, but also this thing that we're referring to as how to work the brain. And a lot of times I'll meet people who really want to get into Harvard Medical School, and they just come to me and they're like, what do I have to do? And then we'll talk about that, and I'll try and get a sense of where they're at. I'll talk to people who want to start a business or who want to do things. They want to understand how they can use their brain as an organ to get where they want to go. But a lot of times people get stuck at this very early stage. They don't even know what they want. And that's a really tough one. And that one I would just recommend just really quickly, if one doesn't know what they want, and I've gone through stages where I didn't know exactly what I wanted in a certain domain of life, to go on an internal listening tour, take in sensory information, and pay attention to how things feel at a gut level. I think that the part of your nervous system that's very primitive, the one that's not very analytic, is very, very smart about goal setting, about what to go after. Maybe not how to go after it, but your gut doesn't lie. I think someone said, I think there's maybe a book, I think it's called like Body, Truth, Mind, Lie. Or maybe that's a Buddhist saying, I don't know. Whoever claimed it on Twitter last was gonna say it was them. But body, truth, mind, lie. There's something very powerful about the gut sense of something positive versus negative. And if you can use that as a compass, that can be very powerful. And people like Martha Beck and other people have written about this, about using that as a compass to steer. One way, I'm just going to give an extreme example of this, two extreme examples to kind of illustrate the point. If you see, for the parents in the audience, if you see your child, there's this just an incredible thing that happens when parents see their child and child sees parents, this immediate feeling of excitement and wonder, right? Then all you have to do is think about somebody that you don't like so much or something you had a conflict with at work, and it's this kind of depressive physical state that happens. And that's the autonomic nervous system engaging all these things like musculature and breathing and kind of collapsing or expanding. I always know how I feel about people, whether or not my eyebrows lift when I see them the first time in a while, I'm excited to see them. Yeah. So there's information there. That's a great way to decide what to pursue. If you kind of think through a series of things and not be afraid to feel disappointed about certain thoughts, maybe you didn't want to be a doctor. Wow, well, okay, well, that's important. Maybe you did, or that it really excites you. And there are a number of other very important lofty goals, everything from social worker to doctor. We know this, right? So I'm just using those as examples. Once you know what you want, and once I've done that exercise, so in my case, it's, 10 years ago, my goals were different, but now it's really figure out, my main goals for the next, 5 to 10 years in my laboratory are to figure out how to regenerate neural connections so that people in wheelchairs can get up and walk and blind people can see. This is how I spend most of my daily life. This is how the funding in my lab is spent. And this is how I've, basically given my life to science, is to try and pursue those, what I know are critical goals that are that are solvable. Okay, so once goals are in place, or I have a physical goal or a language learning goal, so knowing what you want is key. Then I think the positive visualization is extremely powerful, even before you hit resistance, before you hit blocks. And the positive visualization is something that many people are afraid to do. I just noticed this as I interact with people, that you have to sit back and imagine winning the competition, whatever that competition is, the language, the Olympic gold, whatever it is. You have to visualize it. Many people are afraid to do that, and I think it's because most people are afraid of disappointment. But I do agree with you, and the Canfield example illustrates this, that there's something very powerful to saying, and especially to imagining where you want to get to. So I imagine the day when we make a discovery in the lab where whether or not it's a gene or a molecule, some pill or potion, or maybe a behavioral change will allow neural connections to regrow after injury, something that doesn't happen, unfortunately, in human beings. It's the reason why people don't spontaneously get up out of wheelchairs and walk, right? It's the reason why prosthetic limbs have been developed. And it's the reason why people who've been blind since birth don't suddenly see. It doesn't often happen, in rare occasions, but that's for other reasons often. Neural circuits don't regenerate in the adult brain, but we're gonna figure out ways to do that. I'm absolutely confident of that. So once you deal with the fact that imagining is important, then, and you've written down you've identified your goal, you've imagined the goal, then it's a series of steps to get to that goal. And at that point, most people generally know what they need to do, and then it's a simple system of writing out the steps to get there. So working everything in reverse seems to be very powerful. And wrapped into that, once again, this is an opportunity to illustrate something fundamental about the brain that makes us uniquely human, is our ability to imagine things. The ability to imagine is one of the most incredible and powerful abilities, and it's something that kids engage in all the time. And I'm absolutely convinced this is one of the reasons, in addition to acetylcholine and attention and all those things, that they're constantly learning. They're just imagination little beasts, and they're constantly imagining things that aren't even there, and pairing things in space, giving personalities to animals and to dolls and to toys and to trucks, and interacting and putting on different roles. We stopped doing this as adults. There are a few adults throughout history which kind of grab our fascination. Two that come to mind are the great physicist Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, Caltech professor, had a very childlike quality throughout his life. He was known for bongo drumming naked on the roof of Caltech. Nowadays, I'll get you in trouble, so I don't recommend people do that. But he was also,
what's that? Matthew McConaughey with that one too.
Yeah, right. I guess right, exactly. So, but he had this childlike quality and kind of wonder about the world, constantly interested in learning. He became an actually decent artist late into his 60s and 70s. He was interested. Incidentally, he was very into the flotation, sensory deprivation tank thing, very into meditation, and so having an imagination is something we all were born with, and we tend to give that up. The imagination is the single most powerful tool that you have as a biohack, right? I love meditation. I'm really interested in nootropics. I'm interested in behavioral modification, and certainly in how big pharma is going to rescue us from all these deleterious neuropsychiatric diseases and neurodegenerative diseases someday. But your imagination is an incredibly powerful device. This is overlooked. People need to have the courage to sit back and actually think about things that they want to create and do for their lives. And those could be small scale things or major scale things. Maybe it's cooking the most incredible meal with the people that are most important to you. Maybe it's designing the most incredible piece of architecture the world has ever seen. But that ability is right there. It's on cue all the time. You can do it. And most people kind of push it aside. And I think it's one of the reasons it limits their learning. Steve Jobs wrote about this beautifully. He imagined objects that would allow people to communicate at a distance through voice and engage their different senses without being in the same room. We think of that as the smartphone, the iPhone. I mean, that guy was a genius, not because he was so good at putting together the parts. In fact, I'm not even sure he knew how to program. We kind of know Waj was the real genius there. What he did, though, is he could imagine objects that don't yet exist. And so what I think, if people want to get smarter, most people over 60 that I talk to, they say, how do I keep my brain young? They're just dying to know how to keep their brain young. I tell them, keep imagining things. Think about things that are exciting to you and imagine what those would actually look like and feel like and taste like. And it's actually hard to do as you get older. If we just kind of sat back and said, let's close our eyes and imagine a new flying device. It's actually kind of tough. You come up with helicopter, plane, maybe some weird combination of those. But that's how the space shuttle was designed, ultimately. It was a reverse engineering from imagination. Yeah. So that's how I do it. And each year I set specific goals, but each year I also challenge myself to ask whether or not those goals are really lofty enough, meaning did they come from someplace deep in my brain that's really kind of scripted, like a routine, like I get up in the morning and do my kind of usual routine, or am I pushing myself to imagine and go to kind of places that I haven't been this year? And that's the more exciting thing by far.